Hi everyone, I'm Airier, and today we're going to be watching more of TexTalks BattleTech Exodus to Elementals Part 1. Okay, so it's late, I'm tired, and if we're very lucky, no matter how much shit gets dropped on us today, I will be able to go to bed and convince myself it was all just a really terrible dream about clans and some of the dumb fuckery that I've been, not spoiled, but warned, heavily and explicitly warned was going to induce rage and may or may not require a copious amounts of alcohol to survive. Yeah.
That is to say, from Innersphere historical records, they ceased to exist for the most part, but some would always wonder where they had gone.
And then they'll find out.
Upon realizing that the excuse of extended maneuvers were in fact nothing of the sort, were furious Kerensky had left. But they now had their own problems.
Each other?
They were already in the planning stages for what would become the First Succession War. As such, they had more immediate concerns than the weapons, advanced technology, and warriors now outside their reach.
I guess we're covering this now.
And with that simple consideration, the Innersphere turned its gaze inward, with each successor state now eyeing the other as potential territorial acquisitions. As an ancient Terran philosopher has said, war is nothing more than a continuation of politics by other means.
I hate that quote. I really do, but that's more of a personal thing. War is not a continuation of politics. It's the breakdown of politics because you're usually not able to do anything else.
What would follow would certainly be that, and more. Soon enough, there would be a war, the likes of which no one had ever seen. And 3 more after that, to prove, in my humble opinion, one thing.
They're idiots.
In all likelihood, Alexander Kerensky was probably the last greatest hope the Innersphere ever had of a lasting, if not permanent, peace. And now that he had gone, it would soon begin to finally fall apart. But the story of the SLDF doesn't end there. The end of the SLDF...
Funny thing I should probably mention, in the last time we checked out this video, I mentioned what I thought was a fan fiction about what would happen if the SLDF stayed. I made a mistake. It's a free PDF download on Catalyst's website. Catalyst, the people who currently own BattleTech. Yeah. And also Tex is right. Kerensky's probably the best hope, because even in the storyline where, or I guess setting at this point, where the SLDF stayed, they stayed because Kerensky was assassinated before the Exodus. Proving that peace didn't happen because Kerensky was still dead.
Starts where the map to civilization ends, the deep periphery. We're going to have to talk about the Exodus Road.
Oh? So what exactly makes the road special?
Throughout history, there has always been the edge of the map, the frontier, that place where all knowledge of what may lay beyond being the providence of rumor, superstition, and fear. During the early age of sail on ancient Terra, mankind, not knowing what perils lay beyond the edge of the known world, would draw great beasts there and say, "Here be dragons." To cross into the unknown, and what lay beyond has always been the providence of the crazy or desperate or those without other options. And fate.
Oh, I see what he did. It's actually a composition of 4 different maps. You can see the break right there because the lines, while they're similar, they don't quite match up. Maybe. It's hard to tell because, oh, no, wait, is that a wood? Is this a table someone took and made into a map? I don't know, but I'm very curious.
General Alexander Kerensky,
I love these old kind of maps. They're just fun.
That sort of man. And so, the enormous Exodus fleet made careful progress into unknown territory. The deep periphery was at best partially charted space. Long ago, the Innersphere had stopped putting big money into programs of deep space exploration.
Why?
Instead opting to improve the holdings they had or fight over them. It is believed...
Oh, okay, that's probably why. And this is one of the things I mentioned before, and I'm probably going to mention again. I don't get the entire end of exploration. They keep fighting over what they have because it's more developed, and I guess that kind of makes sense for people whose power base is here, and they don't want to lose that power base, and they can just take more power base from someone else, which is the Succession Wars in a nutshell, and also why it was always going to happen, because they're just the idiots who would just do that regardless. But I'm always surprised that no one else is like, hey, why don't we just Go further. Like some kind of crazy whack job heir decides to take a chunk of all the populace that hates the government. Wow, I just said a weird. It's like weird. Apparently I'm speaking weird tonight. Whatever. It's like maybe say Kurita dissidents. It's like, you know what? We won't just do something horrible to you or put you into an easily killed situation. We're going to give you a ship, all the money and power you need to not be here. Go that way, wherever that way is not us. And then they just do. I'm honestly surprised I haven't just done basically Australia and exile people to go explore deep space and not be here. It literally is something I don't... Maybe it's a plot line they've been playing around with for the writers of BattleTech. They just haven't got it because they can do entire sections of lore. Just say it's far periphery or even the core rim or core word. And there's so much to this map, and yet there's even more when you get further on. And it would break so many of the conventions. And just because humanity and exploring things because, hey, maybe we'll find something expensive is one of the greatest driving forces of all humanity. For as realistic as BattleTech is, the lack of exploration past a certain point, while it makes sense overall, not having any feels weird. I mean, we can't even leave our planet, and we've sent probes beyond our solar horizon. I don't know the exact term, mostly because I think it's being redefined, actually. I think it's past the Oort cloud, for sure. It's been a long time. Just to the edge of the solar wind, where mass no longer exceeds our star's capability to throw it, which is a crazy thing when you think about it. And we've sent a probe to that line. Voyager, of course. And I know this is a tangential, but it just... Where is that? People have mentioned there are clans, but they're not entirely canon. Please, if you know, let me know. I want to know, God. And I'm not just focusing on this because everything else about how the inner houses are insular fucks who just say, fuck it, we're just going to be happy and just steal each other's shit because why actually make our own shit when we just steal your shit? Technically, they make their own shit, but then they make it worse. Yeah, except for the Banshee, yes, which is actually an improvement. We're going to ignore that one.
Believe that General Alexander Kerensky only had a vague notion as to their eventual destination.
Oh?
Before departing in preparation,
wait, he didn't actually have a plan where?
The total sum of data from the defunct Star League Astrological Mapping Corps, copying every last chart and map
map mapping
file,
corps go? Like they just get
destroyed
up, or
the
they actually just
originals.
leave?
He wanted to ensure none could follow them. But
deep
beyond the periphery was truly the unknown. And as such, any progress through this poorly charted and mostly unknown region of space came slowly as scouts had to find an optimal path for the fleet and then report back that it was truly safe. Alexander Kerensky was thorough in coordinating the massive fleet, driving scouts forward to find a path while...
Now, this is something I'm actually curious on. How does that work? Because their method of travel is very much hit and miss, but at the same time, why would they need to scout? They could legitimately just go above the orbital plane. Or are they trying to use the orbital plane as a way to hide them from other easily seen sources? But that wouldn't make sense because light could not reach them in that time frame. Maybe I'm just thinking about this wrong. There must be a reason. Maybe they're just trying to save fuel by... I'm going to go, it's probably that they're just trying to strip fuel and elements and resources from anywhere they go just to keep up top because going above the plane probably just costs more energy, fuel, and resources. I'm going to go with that because that doesn't break suspension of disbelief. Also, I mean, if you could just reorient everything by going above the orbital plane and then just dropping back in when you find a good place, it would be much easier.
While directing warships and scouting jump ships to make up a substantial rear guard to ensure they weren't being tailed or followed. Random course corrections were routinely ordered to prevent any forces following their wake from guessing their final destination. Even garbage from the fleet was ejected jumps away from their actual course to prevent being tracked by what they left behind. If any vessel of this era ever did choose to try and follow the Exodus fleet, none ever reported back. But the Inner Sphere also had its hands full at this point.
Yeah, they kind of are busy destroying
great concerns were sadly becoming prophetic. As a necessary side note, I must mention that the First Succession War, starting in 2786, utilized the full arsenals of the great houses and turned into a 34-year-long nightmare, which claimed human lives by the billions. It is accordingly no great surprise that the forces of the great houses, while tremendously upset at the exodus of the SLDF, dedicated few, if any, resources in trying to follow them. They had their...
Okay, I was expecting no resources were dedicated, not few, because few, if any, is not zero. Were there stragglers who decided to join the SLDF rather than go back? That would actually be an interesting plotline. I'm not sure if it's been explored, and I think that would be really cool.
Their own fucking problems by the Megaton. But I guess
Only
that's
a
what
Megaton
happens
at that
when you
point?
throw the rules of warfare out the window and decide to settle things with every weapon you've got.
Yeah.
A total disregard for human life and reckless lack of constraint in the conduct of the First Succession War would result in the technological base of the inner sphere degrading significantly.
Yep.
Through their violent excess, they erased many centuries of progress and a few short decades of intense warfare. In the history of the inner sphere, violence was never the answer. Violence is a question, and the answer is inevitably yes. As the inner sphere began...
I both love and hate that quote. For as much as politics is an extension of warfare or vice versa, whatever. This one, I find it funny because while it sounds like a joke quote, it actually has some really good meaning to it in the sense that violence is the question, the answer is yes. Usually, if you're in the position where violence is asked, it's not usually the wrong choice. Not the best choice, but it's usually not a wrong one. Are there wrong consequences? Yes. But it's very, how to put it, hard. Essentially, if you're in a position where violence is an option and you have the means to do it, you're usually the person who is going to take that option and be good at getting yes out of that, as opposed to someone who's not good at violence, and that's not going to be a question you ask because you're not going to get, I should take this. Basically, it's a mindset thing. At least that's how I've always looked at it. Personal opinion, of course.
Began to slide into eventual war. The Exodus fleet had its own significant trouble.
It's also ridiculous.
Despite careful preparation and well-trained crews, many ships were tragically lost through misjump or catastrophic drive failure.
Is that what we're looking at? A drive failure? I mean, it looks like an external explosion is... Oh, wow. You can actually see the various parts. There's a ship. Oh, is this two ships either colliding or jumping into each other? Yeah, because that's two distinct ships going two different directions. This one's not, neither one has their nose because of how they're angled. Those aren't the pieces that are being rammed, so it wasn't a ramming situation because their noses are intact. It's the midsections and the backs that are connected by the explosion. You can see from the debris here where it's building from here and also from this thing, which is just exploding outward. So this is literally jumping into each other. Oh, that is so cool. Sorry, as much shit as I give some of the older art, god damn, this is imaginative and cool, and they have the billows, and honestly, that's just awesome, man.
Again, vessels would wait at the jump point for ships that failed to ever materialize. One by one,
cool.
The vessels of the Great Fleet
cool.
were being whittled away by what amounted to error and malfunction. Many of the ships in the SLDF were by now ancient, battle-scarred vessels held together far beyond their design lifespan, with scavenged parts and jury-rig repairs.
But they're probably good
As
at
a
doing
noteworthy example, the McKenna warship class, once the pride of the SLDF Navy, was well over 130 years old as a design. And after the hard operations tempo of the Ameris Civil War, multiple refits and hasty wartime repairs, it was no wonder these vessels were beginning to show their age. Shortages in supplies and necessary materials.
And then the part that I probably wasn't even thinking about, they were repairing the ships to standard, not we're going on an infinitely long journey levels of maintenance during the probably decade that Kerensky stayed on Earth. I know it's not a full decade. I think it was like, what, 7, 8 years? I know it was more than 6. But I don't think it was more than... It wasn't a short amount of time, but it wasn't that long either. And some of the repairs on these ships would be near, yes, for how much damage and repairs it's been described as, but I guess it kind of makes sense that repairs and maintenance would be such an issue because even though they had time to rebuild, they probably didn't want to look like they're completely retrofitting their war machine because that would get them in the entire I'm thinking you as a threat problem, which they did want to avoid. That's why there's survivors who stayed with Comstar or became the Com Guard, acted as mercenaries for that first giant push of don't fuck with the Comstar. Yeah.
Resulted in stringent rationing and a universally low standard of living among the forces of the Exodus fleet, but morale was initially quite high. Most believed in General Alexander Kerensky enough to risk death for decades up to this point, so the perils of the unknown were just yet another challenge to overcome. However...
Space Goblin. The more you know.
As fate would have it, this road would be longer than they had ever expected, and after a few months of jumping into the unknown, and now with the inner sphere far, far behind them, some began to express significant doubt. Tensions grew slowly at first between the crews, between the civilians and the military. Some began to consider that the inner sphere was far from perfect, but it was at least civilization, and out here was anything but.
While that would have been right before they left, if they returned, hell, they could probably still... How far does the HPG network extend anyways? It doesn't matter. They would have cut themselves off just to make sure they weren't found. Yeah. I wonder if any of them did actually return and just go, fuck it. I really wouldn't be surprised if they had. I'm also not sure what would have happened either, because they would not have liked what they see. It was like, yeah, on the one hand, on the other end, oh, yeah, there's nothing left. Also, the more I look at it, the more I'm like, what is with these teeth? Like, for some reason, they look like hamster teeth on everyone. It's weird. Am I the only one seeing this as like the teeth are extending beyond where they normally should? It's like they got the faces better, and this one's still kind of deformed. And then it just... Also, his eyes are really high up on his head. It's kind of disturbing. But more, the teeth on both of these guys, it just... Something about it is... It's like they just stick out more than they should. It's weird.
With every jump they pressed on, the SLDF began to crack from these stresses, as more and more of the fleet wondered if leaving everything behind was really the best choice they could have made. Some, in the quiet darkness of space, and now with endless time to ponder the situation, wondered if they'd left for the wrong reasons. And so the seeds of doubt were planted deep in the fleet. Kerensky did what he could to hold them together, to remind them of their purpose. But for many, this journey was becoming a lengthy nightmare.
I don't think anything about what's happening is nonsensical. It makes sense. You're on a long extended voyage with people you had previously fought with, but now that purpose is removed. You basically ran from everything. It's a mix of homesickness and realizing, oh, fuck, we've literally just given up and walked away. And you're stuck with other people. There's a reason, I'm pretty sure it was Camus who said that hell is other people. I could be wrong about the philosopher. I'm pretty sure it was French. Because if you're stuck with someone, and in ships, that's very tight quarters, you are very much stuck with them over and over. That's a giant pressure cooker of, well, fuck, this is bad. And it's so easy to see where the starting tensions between the fractious nature of the clan, everything what to do with the clans. I know this isn't what starts it, but this is probably where they have their own little mini civil war. I would not be surprised at all. I think it'll probably hold off until Kerensky dies. But beyond that, this is not going to be good.
Nightmares spent in cramped ship corridors with no news from home or where they were headed.
Because there is probably no home left.
One by one, ships around them disappeared due to accident. The discomfort of severely cramped living and working conditions, the relatively few amenities, strict rationing, and the feeling of coming to terms with the choice they had made was continually weighing on the minds of the Exodus fleet. Random course corrections ordered by Kerensky to deter pursuit, ships being detached to go dump garbage far away from the route they intended to take, and similar extensive measures in covering their tracks continued to ensure a very slow pace of progress. While these measures were incredibly successful in covering their tracks, as even Comstar's intelligence service would find years later, these very precautions to safeguard their journey would result in such a slow pace of progress as to further add to the general worry that the Exodus was a faltering exercise in futility, not a planned military operation.
I mean, Kerensky's awesome, but that's not an incorrect interpretation. It's not a military operation because there is no battle. It's literally avoiding the battle. And it's not well planned because even though it actually was well planned, I got to remember, I'm looking at this with the 2020 hindsight of knowing what comes. So saying that it's faulty is very much the case because everything he wanted, the clans more or less kind of betrayed. It's where the inner sphere gave up technology and basic human decency. The clans gave up just basic human decency. A lot of them. Not all of them. Some of them are still decent, but a lot of them were... yeah. There's a few that I don't look up information on because, joking aside about the teal turkeys, I can deal with them. It's funny. There's others. Yeah. Let's just drop that one. Yeah, there's some really fucked up shit out there that makes Kurita look... It makes Kurita look... Okay. The first time was a joke. The second time I literally just felt like biting my tongue before saying something nice about Kurita. We're just going to drop it. Just... It's not as hard as the last one because it doesn't feel as in your face, just knowing what's about to happen because of the moment of Exodus starting. This is just more that slow disintegration of what was so great becoming lesser. It's watching it die. It's like literally watching the SLDF die, and Kerensky, he's still alive, and I just... This is hard to watch.
Began to fear that they were merely floating around in the periphery until they all died, got lost.
I mean, technically that's
starved.
Not wrong.
Some began to believe this was a trip to nowhere, a living purgatory spent between old bulkheads.
If he had a
worse
planet
company,
they were heading towards, it would be so
and
much
rapidly
easier,
deteriorating morale. Alexander Kerensky did his best to lead people through the Exodus, shuttling between ships at every jump, taking time to explain why it was a far better choice to leave than pound the great house lords of the inner sphere into submission. He took time to listen, to patiently hear their concerns, and showed extraordinary resolve in maintaining morale as best he could. But in the end, he was only one man. While Alexander Kerensky knew how difficult it was to hold people together through the uncertainty and chaos of a long war, he found it all that much harder to hold them together through peace, especially when all there is to do is wait and see what the
I find this to be one of the funny things. As much as BattleTech is a very much war-focused continuum of, well, fuckery and awesome moments, I hate that I find this funny, but the greatest battle Kerensky could fight that he could never win is probably this one. Because all the other military victories, I would put my money on him. And he has always come through. Maybe not perfectly, maybe horribly, painfully Pyrrhic in the victory, but, you know, he's pretty damn good at it. He picked his fights, he knew where to fight, and he could make do. This piece is not easy. And this is also why I don't think people who say that earlier quote about war is just the continuation of politics, it's wrong, because Kerensky is very good at war, but he's not good at politics to the extent he was needed. It's a very different skill set. And anyone who believes otherwise is usually making a horrible, horrible mistake and is about to get their ass kicked or lose in ways that the victory is not worthwhile. Yeah. I won't name anyone in particular, but maybe someone who has faulty intel and they're not actually a military guy. They like just throwing random troops that die horribly. And I'm not thinking of anyone that's a giant fucking asshole. We're going to ignore that. Fuck Putin. What was that? Yeah. As great a general as he is, this is not his wheelhouse. It's not his skill set. And while he's good at morale with a goal, it doesn't seem like this piece has a goal. He doesn't have that point of exploration they're trying to reach. He doesn't have that unifying fire that the war had, because, yeah, they were probably under way harsher conditions with people literally trying to murder them. And their attrition rate is still probably not as bad now, even with all the problems building up, as it was when people were literally trying to kill them. But they don't know what they're fighting for, and it seems like that's the one thing Kerensky never gave them. And right now, I don't even think he's going to hold them together, but they're at least going to respect him. If not a lot, then at least because they initially came for him and they're just pissed. When he dies, it's going to be horrible. It's really going to be bad. It's basically like the succession wars of the clans, or probably the birth of, oh God.
Next jump brings. This wasn't helped by the General's own family fucking things up.
General's
At the start of the Exodus, General Alexander Kerensky revealed he had a family.
They didn't know that?
He'd been married for nearly 2 decades by the start of the Exodus.
Oh, yeah,
because kept
they
that
weren't there
fact
for a lot of it.
hidden, save for a few trustworthy souls. The years leading up to the Amer Civil War and the time following it had been chaotic. To protect his family from reprisal, he had kept their place in the inner sphere a necessary secret. His wife and his 2 sons had been in Moscow during the Ameris occupation, and their anonymity had most certainly assured their survival. Trapped on Terra during the war, Katyusha had bravely resisted Ameris' occupation, committed herself to sabotaging the regime at every chance she had while bitterly fighting for her family's survival. She was tough as nails, was nearly captured on a handful of occasions, and even shot twice.
Goddamn, lady.
She maintained a spirit of defiance and resolved, for her family's sake, to never give up. But while Alexander Kerensky's wife Katyusha was a bedrock of emotional and moral support, his sons were a colossal pain in his ass.
Wait, multiple?
I have, to this point, been largely unbiased.
Okay, 1, I didn't realize there was 2 sons. I have always and only ever heard of Nicholas. 2, largely been unbiased. Tex, are you okay? Because you literally ended the Amaris bit with him being thrown into the dumpster at a Golden Corral, and that's not even the worst thing you've said about him. Granted, you also gave him some props for making do with being a glorious evil bastard, but we're going to ignore that because I guess that is unbiased, taking into account he is an evil bastard, making fun of him, but also a little bias. Oh, wait. Does he mean by comparison? This text is Nick. Am I going to hate Nicholas more than Amaris? Oh, I'm not going to like this, am I?
But when it comes to the General's sons, I can't guarantee to hold my tongue. They are responsible for their actions and everything that followed. You have been warned. In some history circles, it is often suggested that any competent ruler or leader will be eclipsed by the sheer incompetence, stupidity, or madness of their heirs or offspring. Some historians have even chosen to mark this problem as an unavoidable progression of any dedicated ruling class.
I've actually heard of this where a great leader has horrible kids. As a catch-all phrase, I don't like it because it's oversimplifying the problem. That said, the reason for it is because it's based on the usual concept of the person who first attains power and is great has to fight to become great. And they are either ruthless or brilliant or charismatic or creative, and something about them elevates them. They are in some way, shape, or form able to pull it together and just get there. The person after them, if they're going with a dynastic style, doesn't have to do any of that. And while it's not impossible, the forge that would make someone great isn't going to touch those people. So they'll basically be man children, because most people will not spoil their kids. They'll overdo it because the honest not problem of, well, I had to suffer and I don't want you to suffer, which sounds great up until the kid believes that they don't need to ever suffer, and it doesn't matter. It's actually a problem. You see it not just in leaders or great people's kids, but anyone who comes from nothing and suddenly their kids are spoiled brats. Yeah, honestly, just it's why normality is so useful, because it gives you at least a level playing field of shit that you know how to deal with. Maybe you become great, maybe you don't, but there's at least that level of shit you can deal with is very important growing up. And a lot of people who have great parents, great people, don't let that level of shit hit their kids. I know this is a weird phrase and a horrible way to put it, but small little troubles do make for better people because they learn how to get over it. And then these, not him, but just the people who follow them are just spoiled man children. Sorry, I'm very much thinking of a specific Cameron who I was ragging on constantly during the Amaris videos, and I still stand justified by that. I'm very afraid I'm going to say this about a Kerensky now, and I don't like it.
Wherein a great unifying ruler will pass the reins onto the less capable and far less competent heirs.
Yeah,
and
don't
so
worry.
that in a few generations, any dynasty will undermine its own foundation and result in total ruin.
The only reason I can't hate Amaris completely is because he did take out this idiot. I know people are trying to excuse him, and just even seeing him again, it's just man-child.
So I suppose this is where I introduce Nicholas and Andrei Kerensky.
Don't know anything about Andrei.
Yes, I know in agreed upon sources it's put as Andrei, but I'm not going to say that because my brain will autocorrect it every time.
Okay,
and while I
reason.
would like to label Nicholas and Andrei as the Goofus and Gallant of the Kerensky lineage, the comparison would be tragically incorrect. Also, I think the clanners in the audience would bachelor me the moment I stopped talking in order to claim me a bondsman in order to tell them bedtime stories until I perish. So in the interests of a temporary peace, I think I'd rather label them as what they were.
Dumbasses?
Flawed men in the shadow of a truly great one.
Oh.
Nicholas Kerensky was the elder son of General Kerensky and of near zero historical significance at this point in his life.
What?
Not saying he was crap, but comparing him to his father is like comparing raisins to wine.
I mean, on the one hand, raisins are generally just good and you can't really fuck them up. On the other hand, you could easily fuck up wine. Seriously, anyone who says they make their own wine, run. Just don't. That shit is almost without fail noxious at best. And I don't always mean that as a taste. I mean sometimes literally you'll feel like you're literally dying. I don't mean that figuratively. I do mean literal death is what it feels like. I'm not saying I'm literally having flashbacks to the one time a neighbor did that when I was growing up, but I was like, hey, I could just start drinking a couple days ago. Let's try it. And I'm just going to repress everything I just said. But more importantly, that's the nicest thing I've ever heard Tex or anyone say about Nicholas. That he wasn't he was a flawed man in a great man's shadow. Yeah, that is the nice one. Also, how is it? Is it just the art they're using for Kerensky that he looks so much younger than his son? Maybe it's the shadow. It's probably the heavy shadowing and the heavy lines on him that do it. Yeah, maybe in a different style of art it would look different.
Same ingredients, but far different outcomes. As a person, Nicholas Kerensky was known principally for being exceptionally manipulative, especially where his own legacy was later concerned. Clan records revere him as being a near saint, but he had a major hand in writing his own legacy. Further, I suspect that his creative historical revisionism was exercised to enhance his standing, associate his legacy with the great accomplishments of his father, all the while downplaying his many, many faults. I feel that Nicholas Kerensky feared that history would realize he was nothing more than the troubled son of a great man.
Now, that's actually an interesting way to describe it, that he basically Stalined his way to historical relevance. It probably not the only way, but the way they described it is, specifically how text said, was that he revised his own history. So what I'm used to is probably thinking of him as the guy who did all this stuff, where it might not even be him. He might have literally just wrote himself in. How much of the actual lore on him is lore, and how much is just what's handed down by him? Also, don't have the slightest clue what this art is, but it's really cool how they have this really fucked up, hyper-stylized genetic code model right here. Interesting.
Desperately trying to hold on to the significance of his legacy, and through that ensure his own
is that a person's
in the
head?
Spotlight. What I can say with any certainty is that he was only 2 when the American Civil War started, and only 16 when it ended. So any reports of him having played a significant role in the conflict are probably horse shit. However, records of his deeds from this time period are hard to find, as those who survived the American occupation of Terra seldom spoke of the atrocities they endured. I believe this made a mark on him he would carry his entire life. He was a brash and headstrong man with a propensity to try to get his own way regardless of the consequences. As far as I am able to find, he trended towards sociopathic behavior with deep-seated emotional issues no doubt stemming from the horrors of the American Civil War. But more on that in a bit.
Oh, because he was 2 years old when... He's a fundamentally broken human, isn't he? Not just the manipulative aspect, but a lot of the times, almost all of the childhood trauma you have, not the entire thing I talked about, like just normal everyday things, like skinning your leg, having to learn how to deal with failure here and there, just failing or being hungry a few times or knowing how to do things. But honest to God, over the top, PTSD-inducing levels of shit, he's broken and then it's over. I'm assuming it's the occupation of terror. Was this near the end, or how old was he when this happened? I was thinking he would go full man-child, which is very much the thing that does happen, but it sounds like he's going the exact opposite end. He's taking the absolute worst of humanity and thinking that's normal. Oh, this is a lot worse than I was expecting. And I just realized why they have the stylized genetic code next to him. It's because of clans and their genetic fuckery. Oh, that's probably why, showing a descendant of him. Yeah, okay, yeah. His representative.
Andrei Kerensky was Nicholas's brother, who was the younger son of Katyusha and Alexander Kerensky. He was born on Terra, but spent most of his childhood trying to survive in the shadow of Maris's security forces. By his adolescent years, he was fighting alongside local resistance forces from their Moscow base. I believe that he was, above all, quite humble and content to play whatever role history assigned to him. He was also a bit naive and trusting in the extreme, especially where his fellow SLDF personnel were concerned. And doubly so for his family. And it was through this trust he was directly manipulated by his brother Nicholas.
You know how I mentioned that I've never heard of Andrei? I think we're about to hear why.
Into encouraging the dissidents in the fleet to act on their desperate dissatisfaction. Did I mention Nicholas Kerensky was a manipulative sociopath? And we know how that typically plays out, right? What is known for certain is that Nicholas Kerensky used his brother Andrei to encourage those among the fleet who thought the exodus was a mistake into what would become an open mutiny. Why he did this is a bit harder to pin down, as the records of the event are probably revised by Nicholas himself and naturally paint this as the weakness of the men and women in question, not his own manipulation. Perhaps Nicholas felt it was time to take charge away from his aging father. Perhaps Nicholas felt it was now his destiny to lead the Exodus fleet to...
Oh, I thought he was... So he's manipulating his brother Andrei into starting it. I thought he was going to manipulate people into killing Andrei and then just taking over and being a power grab asshole a la Amaris. No, he's setting up Kerensky's death, isn't he? I want to be wrong. I really want to be wrong.
To the promised land, as his father had led them through the war. Perhaps he was tired of not being the center of attention and wanted his moment in the sun to steer his own destiny for once. Perhaps Nicholas wanted to do away with these non-believers and call the fleet of the weak personnel lacking the necessary faith to proceed.
The people who would listen to him
I feel that
regardless.
Nicholas was fundamentally damaged and didn't know how trust worked. What is known is he pushed his younger brother into speaking with the disaffected officers and crews wanting to end the Exodus. And as such, I feel it is entirely fair to put the responsibility of what followed on him. After 14 long months of slowly jumping deeper and deeper into unknown space and with devious manipulation on behalf of Nicholas Kerensky, morale collapsed to a breaking point.
I asked earlier why they didn't keep exploring. I have a feeling this is why. Because it didn't suit his designs.
It was in August of 2785
of course,
that
making
things
it
came
worse
to
on
a
purpose
head.
to try and push
Many
this
were now
conflict.
openly concerned that the great general had zero plans other than keeping the fleet moving forward at any cost, one jump at a time. By this time, through urging by Andrei Kerensky on the orders and influence of his brother Nicholas, enough officers had decided mutiny was the best remaining course of action, and perhaps emboldened by the support of Alexander Kerensky's progeny, they acted. And the repercussions of the decision would prove remarkable. The Prince Eugen, a Texas-class battleship, openly broke from the fleet, announcing a plan to return to the inner sphere and whatever fate awaited them. They would not take a single jump further, nor would they obey any orders to return to the fleet.
Oh yeah, remember how I said I thought some people might actually leave? Oh yeah.
They were leaving on their own terms back to the inner sphere by the most direct course available. If this had been one of the multitude of scout vessels or light warships, none would have likely taken notice. This whole incident may have been chalked up to a misjump if they had chosen to simply disappear. But the Prince Eugen was a Texas-class battleship, one of 52 built pre-Amaris coup, and was now one of only 7 in existence. It was a significant vessel to break from the fleet, and perhaps due to her imposing status in the order of battle, she was joined by a small flotilla who had no intention of continuing the Exodus any step further.
I haven't even got to the worst part yet. But the writing isn't so much on the wall as it has a freaking flashing neon sign installed on it that says, "Here be shit!" I thought he was just going to be another man-child. Oh, were we so lucky? He's a manipulative, psychopathic piece of shit. And it sounds like he has a general brother who trusts him and, you know, is being manipulated as hell. I just... I think this is the last time where I'm going to be able to do these with any level of sobriety, because every flag Tex is pulling up. It's like, death here, murder here. Oh, it's going to be a painful death here. I thought Kerensky was going to die of old age and then things splinter. Apparently, it looks like it's not. as much as it's like I said earlier, it's watching someone you had really rooted for, the SLDF, die. First officially and now in spirit. And this is horrible. It's good lore and Texas is doing a great job portraying it, but God damn it. This is not easy to sit through. I'm going to go get shit-faced and maybe fall asleep and pretend this didn't happen until next week when I remind myself. In the meantime, thanks for watching, everyone. This is actually starting to really hurt. This is legitimately painful. People told me. I was warned. This is on me. This is on me for not listening again to do this sober. This is on me. Fuck, man. All the same, you guys know the deal. All my bitching aside, Tex is doing a great job. This is good lore, and I like it, and I kind of wish he would do a worse job at it so it wouldn't hurt nearly as much. Yeah. Links below. Original video. Hit it up. And when you're done, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and tell me if I should get something maybe like Irish coffee or go full-on glass of rum. I honestly don't know which one I'm preferring right now. We'll find out. See you guys in the next one. Adios.